Everything is a lot cooler when you dual wield it, so why not heavy bolters and plasma cannons? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the tactics focused 40k channel where we look at individual units and how to get most out of them on the tabletop. We've been going through the Space Marine Codex bit by bit, and we've now reached Primaris Inceptors, the enormous flying Gravis armoured Space Marines that drop down from on high and unleash hell with all of their nasty firepower. In this video we'll be looking at the unit's stats and rules, their war gear options, all the buffs that we can give them either with stratagems, characters, etc., and then having a quick think about how we'll field them on the tabletop. Inceptors were some of the models first introduced for the Primaris Space Marines in the Dark Imperium box, and their rules have got steadily better since until now, where in the new Codex they're far stronger than they've ever been before. In the fluff, they're the pinnacle of a Space Marine armoured strike force unit that jumps into the middle of the enemy, unleashes death on all sides, and acts as part of a larger strike force that helps to bludgeon the enemy into submission. They're often paired with drop pod assault units, which also exemplify this tactic. They're equipped in Gravis armour just like the aggressors, and they have enormous heavy jump packs and wear anti-grav repulsion footwear that helps to keep that enormous weight of armour aloft. So let's get into their rules then. Inceptors are bought in a 3-man unit, and they're a fast attack choice for Codex Space Marines. You can choose to include another 3 Inceptors in the squad, and one member of the squad is a sergeant and he gets that upgrade for free. They have one of 2 war gear options. They can either be equipped with assault bolters or plasma exterminators. When they're equipped with assault bolters, they are 41 points per model, so a minimum squad of them is 123 points. And when they're equipped with plasma exterminators, they are 59 points a model, so a squad of 3 will set you back 177 points. Inceptors are a unit with the fly keyword. They have movement 10 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3, strength 4, toughness 5, 3 wounds, which is an upgrade on what they had in the previous codex, 2 attacks, leadership 7, and a 3-up save. As per normal, the sergeant gets an additional attack and an additional point of leadership, so he is leadership 8. The Inceptors don't have any additional war gear, aside from their assault bolters or plasma exterminators, so let's take a look at those. An assault bolter is an 18-inch assault 3 heavy bolter essentially. It's strength 5, AP -1, and damage 1. So as each Inceptor carries 2 of them, there will be 6 shots with these guys. And the plasma exterminator is essentially an 18-inch range assault D3 plasma cannon. It can either choose to shoot on standard mode, so that's strength 7, AP -3, damage 1, or fire on supercharged mode, which is strength 8, AP -3, damage 2. They're 18-inch assault D3 guns. Of course, when you fire on supercharged mode, if you roll any hit rolls of 1, then the model firing the weapon is destroyed. And this is a seriously nasty penalty on a unit that is 59 points per model, and fires quite a lot of overcharged plasma shots per model. They have the Angels of Death special rule, which gives them access to combat doctrines, which is helpful for giving them an extra AP -1 when they shoot with their assault bolters in the tactical doctrine, and they have Shock Assault, which gives them an additional attack in the first round of combat, which is a nice little combat boost. Aside from this, they have the Meteoric Descent special rule, which allows them to start in Deep Strike Reserve and set up on either turn 2 or 3, 9 inches away from enemy models. That's particularly helpful because it means that the enemy won't be able to shoot them down before they've at least had one full shooting phase against the enemy. In addition to this, they also have Crushing Charge, so if they do charge an enemy, and every model that ends a charge within 1 inches of an enemy unit will allow you to roll a d6. On a 6, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So say if you charge with a full squad of 6 of these, you'd have 6 chances of rolling that 6 to make a mortal wound. Now this is a very minor buff, and I wouldn't usually recommend changing my game strategy to make use of it, because even with a full squad, you're only doing on average 1 mortal wound, and you're not even guaranteed to do that. Their combat isn't bad per se, as they do have 2 strength 4 attacks each and 3 on the charge, but I'd say that the mortal wound thing is a little extra nice to have. It's not going to actually help you against any serious opponents. And finally they have the Combat Squad special rule, which will allow a 6-man squad to break down into 2 3-man squads. If it were me, I'd just run multiple small 3-man squads, as you get the extra sergeant benefit if you just run them as 3-man squads to start with. It's important to remember that the unit has the fly special rule, so when they fall back they'll still be able to shoot with their very nice guns as normal. So overall they're a unit that wants to drop in, deal a lot of damage to the enemy, and then go hunting down other enemy light units. Out of their 2 weapon options, I would always take the Assault Bolters personally. I think that the Plasma Exterminators have a few big issues. Firstly, they're not actually that damaging for the amount of points that you pay for them. They don't actually do any more damage than 2 standard Space Marines with plasma cannons, and you don't pay as much for 2 Marines with plasma cannons as you do for 1 Inceptor. Also, you'll ideally be wanting to supercharge them to actually have any decent damage output, and even with reroll 1s you have a reasonably high chance of killing an Inceptor or 2 with your own shooting. For each Inceptor that shoots on average 4 shots with reroll 1s, then you have around about a 20% chance of killing that Inceptor. So if you overcharged an entire 6-man squad as a target, you could still expect to lose about 1 on average. This means that you certainly need to be inflicting a lot more damage than 60 points worth of model, because you're likely to kill that yourself without even forcing the enemy to take any shots at the unit. The only time I would consider Plasma Inceptors is with Dark Angels, and that's only because they can use the Weapons of the Dark Age stratagem to boost their plasma damage to a flat damage 3. One further issue with the plasma weapon is that the enemy might just be able to screen you out of range with chaff screening units, so you can't even get to the tanks or heavy targets that you want to shoot in his backfield. So now we've talked about the Plasma Exterminator, I'll say why I would like to run the Assault Bolters a lot more. Firstly, they're a lot cheaper per model, so the squad is a lot more durable point for point. Secondly, Strength 5 AP-1 is about on the sweet spot for just about damaging M. There are very few targets in the entire game that will want to eat Strength 5 -1 shots. Knights will still get wounded on 5s and have a -1 to their save. Light Infantry will get wounded on 3s, and medium-sized Toughness 5 targets will get wounded on 4s. They do slightly suffer from the Jack-of-all-trades, Master-of-none effect, where they're not particularly strong at shooting down any individual thing, but you can point them at the thing that needs to die most in your opponent's army, and they will put on some reasonable damage with it, particularly when they're in the Tactical Doctrine and having -2. And really they should be in the Tactical Doctrine by turn 2, because they'll have had to wait off the board for a little bit. So now we've discussed the units and their rules, let's see what combos and buffs we can do to make them stronger on the battlefield. There are a few chapter tactics and boosted combat doctrines that help them out. White Scars could make them a bit of a terror in the enemy's backlines, because as well as being able to fall back and shoot their guns, they can also charge in as well to another enemy unit and tie up some shooting unit that really doesn't want to be in close combat. Raven Guards could make them very hard to shift when they're in, as they'll gain an extra -1 to hit, and with their boosted doctrine in the Tactical Doctrine, they'll have +1 to hit and wound against characters, which could be very nice, dropping in on targets of opportunity. Iron Hands also is a reasonable choice, as a 6-up Feel No Pain is actually quite decent on 3 wound infantry, due to being able to potentially mitigate a flat 3 damage shot from just killing one in one go. Imperial Fists and Crimson Fists are both very very good with these guys, specifically the bolter variants, due to the extra shots that they get with bolter weapons. Also they might trigger the Crimson Fist's ability to get +1 to hit against large units, and they might often be digging out infantry from cover, so the Imperial Fist trait would help them there. I already mentioned that Dark Angels have good synergy with the Plasma variant, and of all things Black Templars might be quite good, as they can re-roll charges out of Deep Strike to give them around about 50-50 chance of getting a surprise charge off on an unsuspecting enemy unit straight from the drop. In terms of successor traits, Bolter Fusillades for the Assault Bolters will be very useful, as these guys might be operating independently away from the rest of your forces, and Stealthy isn't a bad pick either, to mitigate the amount of damage that they take in return. I wouldn't typically expect to be running these guys with too many supporting characters or buffs, but if you can get a captain or lieutenant in range of them, then it certainly won't hurt. Perhaps a jump pack captain could drop down with them and then they could shoot their guns off, and then the jump pack captain could try and make his charge to hit an enemy heavy unit. There also aren't really too many stratagems that you'd really want to use on these guys. One to bear in mind, however, is Hammer of Wrath, which for 1 CP will trigger a very similar ability to their Crushing Charge ability, but instead of just being a 6-up for each unit within 1 inches of each model after the charge, it's actually a 5-up to inflict that mortal wound. This could occasionally be worth it on a full squad of 6 Inceptors, as between the stratagem and their Crushing Charge rule, they'll have on average 3 mortal wounds. It could be enough to finish off a hard target in a pinch. The only other core book stratagem that really stood out to me was Transhuman Physiology, to give them an extra boost of survivability if they happen to be targeted by a nasty anti-tank weapon. Incidentally, that's 2 CP to never be wounded on better than a 4 for 1 phase. So how would you run them on the tabletop? I think there are merits both to having them on the board at the start of the game, when they can contribute their firepower to the battle right from the start, or you could drop them in later on to ensure they get their full firepower off at least once before taking any casualties. I would say the latter would be better if the enemy doesn't have enough units to deny you good drop zones, say against elite armies such as other Space Marines. But if you're playing, say, a horde of demons or loads of guardsmen, then your options for jumping in behind enemy lines are going to be a lot more limited if the player isn't playing a bit stupidly. From there, I would jump around hugging cover, as they'll get good benefit out of it with their power armor, and certainly think about charging into enemy shooting units to deal additional damage in the assault phase, and also to try and stop them from being able to shoot in their turn. They could also be good for going after backfield enemy objectives, and maybe trying to ambush weaker buffing characters. I feel that these guys actually pay a lot for their ability to cause a lot of disruption and give your opponent a headache if they aren't eliminated, which could make up for the fact that they're not actually as high a damage output for their costs compared with some of the other units in the Space Marine decks. If I were to run some Inceptors myself in a competitive list, I would tend to run 3-man squads with assault bolters and use them as disruption and eliminating light targets. However, I'm not sure if I would run these guys in a competitive list. They do have a lot of merits and they're certainly not to be written off, but I feel that they are somewhat overshadowed by other units, particularly aggressors which are in Gravis armor, and while being less mobile, they just have such a higher damage output both in shooting and massively more in close combat with those power fists. Now in some armies, particularly Raven Guard and White Scars, you have the option to deep strike or outflank aggressors, which really robs the Inceptors of some of their niche. Overall, I would rate them as moderately competitive. I think that there are stronger options out there, but you won't be hurt too much by including them in your list, in my opinion. As always, if I've missed anything, then please let me know, or if you've had any particularly good success with Inceptor squads yourself. I do feel like they have the potential to have big impacts on the game if the opponent decides that they're not quite as big a threat as some of your other units, and then they could go on to do something pretty damaging. For my next unit review, I'll be looking at the Redemptor Dreadnought. I hopefully should have that out within a day or two of this video. So thank you very much for listening, and if you wish to see that, then consider subscribing to Auspex Tactics. I'll see you guys in the next video.